Hey guys, what's up? Tonight we're gonna travel along the Silk Road. Before you get comfy, if you like what I do here, go ahead and hit that like button and maybe subscribe. Alright, now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or some chill background noise, and let's just ease into this story together. Dawn at Chang'an, the beginning of the journey. The city of Chang'an awoke beneath a veil of pale mist. Somewhere in the distance, the temple bells rang, deep and low, carrying across the sleeping rooftops like waves breaking upon the shore of a dream. The first light of dawn touched the tiled eaves of the great capital, and the scent of rain from the night before lingered in the air. Down at the eastern gate, a caravan was stirring. Men moved between the shadows of tall camels, their shapes rising and swaying like ships in harbour. Saddles creaked softly, ropes tightened, and faint jingles of small bronze bells echoed as the animals shifted their weight. The road ahead stretched far beyond sight, through mountains, deserts, and lands spoken of in half-remembered tales. I was one of the travellers preparing to depart that morning. Not a merchant, not a soldier, merely a wanderer drawn by the whisper of distant horizons. My pack was light, a few scrolls, a small inkstone, and enough silver coins to trade for bread and tea. Yet my heart carried the heavier weight, the desire to see, to understand, to move endlessly forward. The caravan master, a man of grey beard and steady hands, moved through the ranks of traders. His voice was calm, but each word carried authority. "Check the bindings," he said. "No rope must be loose before sunrise." A young boy, perhaps his son, ran beside him, holding a list of names written on silk paper. The boy's eyes were still bright with sleep, yet curious. He glanced often at the road, as if trying to imagine what waited beyond the city walls. Near the gate, incense was burning. The faint smoke curled upward toward the paling sky, a silent offering to the spirits of travel. A priest stood nearby, blessing each caravan before departure. He touched the heads of the lead camels with a sprig of pine and murmured, "May your feet know no stone. May your path be clear, your return assured." We bowed, one by one, and when the prayer ended, a great stillness followed. Then the wooden gates of Chang'an began to open, slow, heavy, ancient. The hinges groaned like the waking of the earth itself. A thin shaft of sunlight broke through, falling across the faces of the travellers. And so the journey began. The first steps always feel uncertain. The sound of hooves upon the packed earth, the soft crunch of sand, the low murmur of voices. Behind us, the city receded quickly, swallowed by morning haze. Ahead, the open plains unfolded, endless, silent, painted gold by the rising sun. Camels walked in long, swaying rhythm. Each had a bell tied around its neck, and together they created a slow, hypnotic music. It was said that the sound of caravan bells could guide a lost traveller in the desert, carrying for miles across the still air. Listening to them, I felt time itself begin to stretch, like the long shadows of dawn. We passed small villages at the edge of the city's farmland. Mud walls, thatched roofs, thin plumes of smoke rising from morning fires. Farmers paused to watch us, leaning on their tools. Children waved, their laughter following us like wind through reeds. Soon even that faded, and all that remained was the steady rhythm of the road. By midday, the sun stood high and bright. The road climbed gently upward, and from a ridge I could see the wide valley below. The silver thread. The caravan stopped to rest near a stream. We knelt by the water, washing dust from our hands and faces. Someone brewed tea in a small bronze pot, the fragrance of dried leaves rising with the steam. The camels drank quietly, their long shadows trembling on the surface of the stream. I wrote in my journal, "The road feels endless, yet strangely calm. The sound of bells, the scent of tea, the dust on my hands, they weave together like threads of the same cloth." As we continued, the landscape began to change. The lush farmlands gave way to rocky hills, where only sparse grass grew between the stones. Here and there stood watchtowers, old and weathered, their walls carved with names of travellers long gone. At sunset, the caravan made camp at the base of a low ridge. Fires were lit, and pots of rice and lentils simmered slowly. The men sat in small circles, sharing stories in a mix of tongues: Chinese, Persian, Turkic, their words blending with the crackle of flames. One old trader spoke of the desert beyond Dunwang, how the wind could erase footprints within moments, how travellers tied bells to their camels not for beauty, but so they could follow the sound in a sandstorm and not lose one another. He smiled as he spoke, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Every sound on the road has meaning," he said. "Even silence." I looked up at the stars, cold, bright, endless, and wondered how many others had looked at the same sky from this same path hundreds of years before. The thought filled me with a quiet peace. Somewhere in the dark, a bell chimed softly. It was the same slow rhythm we had heard all day, but now, in the stillness of night, it felt deeper, like a heartbeat echoing across the land. That night, I slept beside the fire, with my cloak pulled tight, listening to the wind move gently across the grass. And when I dreamed, I saw the road stretching onward, a ribbon of gold through the mountains, and heard the faint murmur of 1,000 voices carried by time through the northern mountains. By the third day, the road had begun to rise. The fertile valleys of the east were behind us now, replaced by the whisper of wind through dry grass and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. The air grew thinner, cooler, and touched with the scent of pine and stone. The caravan moved in a slow rhythm, following the ancient trail that wound like a ribbon through the mountains. Sometimes the path narrowed to a ledge carved into the rock, where even the camels hesitated before placing their feet. Below us stretched a sea of mist, shifting and curling between dark ridges. Above, the peaks caught the morning light, pale gold at first, then turning white as the sun rose higher. Each step upward felt like walking into another world. The city, the markets, the noise of human life, all seemed impossibly far away now. Here, the only voices were the wind and the bells. At times, the sound of the caravan faded entirely, swallowed by the mountain's silence. I could hear only the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground and the faint rattle of pebbles rolling down the slope. Even the camels, those patient giants, seemed subdued, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. By midday, snow began to fall, not the thick, heavy kind, but a quiet, drifting snow that seemed almost shy. Flakes gliding sideways in the wind, settling on our cloaks and melting into tiny drops. The world turned softer, quieter still. The mountains, the road, the sky, all became one endless shade of white and grey. An old man in the caravan, his beard dusted with frost, said softly, "Snow is the breath of the mountain. It tells you when to listen." No one replied. There was nothing to add. The mountain itself seemed to be speaking. That evening we reached a small plateau where travelers had built a stone shelter. Little more than a wall and a roof of wood, blackened by countless fires before ours. Inside, the wind moaned through the cracks, but the fire we lit was warm and steady. We gathered close, sharing dried meat and rice cooked in snowmelt. Someone began to hum, a low, wordless tune that echoed in the hollow space. It reminded me of temple chants from Chang'an, though rougher, shaped by the road and the cold. Others joined in, their voices blending with the hiss of the fire and the groan of the wind. It was not music for performance, but for survival, a way of keeping the heart awake when the world outside tried to freeze it. I sat near the entrance, watching the snow drift past the doorway. The sky had turned a deep indigo, and far below I could see faint lights from a distant valley. Perhaps another caravan, perhaps a village. The sight stirred something in me, the realization that even in the vastness of this silence, we were never truly alone. Later that night, as the others slept, I stepped outside. The cold bit into my fingers instantly, but I stayed, looking upward. The stars here were sharper than I had ever seen. Thousands of them scattered across the sky like shards of crystal. The Milky Way stretched from one peak to another, so close it seemed you could touch it. And there, under that endless sky, I understood something the old trader had said days ago. Every sound on the road has meaning. Even silence. In the mountains, silence wasn't emptiness. It was presence, the hum of stone, the heartbeat of the earth itself. The longer I stood there, the more I felt that stillness move through me, as though the mountain's breath had entered my own. When dawn came, the snow had stopped. The peaks shone like glass in the early light. We loaded the camels once more, their breaths forming clouds that caught the sunlight like silver smoke. The bells began to chime again, soft and steady, marking the rhythm of another day. As we walked, the path led us beside a frozen stream. Beneath the ice, I could hear the faint trickle of water, hidden but alive. It made me think of how, even in stillness, something always moves beneath the surface. Thoughts, dreams, memories flowing quietly under the frozen crust of the mind. At noon, we passed a solitary pine tree clinging to the edge of a cliff. Its roots twisted through cracks in the stone, holding firm against wind and snow. The old man who had spoken before, stopped beside it and smiled. "This is what it means to endure," he said. "Not to resist the mountain, but to bend with it." I touched the tree's bark, rough and cold, and thought of all the travelers who must have done the same, each one finding a kind of strength in its persistence. Then, with a final glance at the vast landscape below, we moved on. By evening, we descended into a narrow valley where the snow gave way to dry earth again. A thin river wound between cliffs, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. We made camp beside the water. Fires glowed warm against the dark rock walls, and the night felt softer than before. Someone brewed tea from mountain herbs, bitter but comforting. As I drank, I listened to the distant echo of wind moving through the pass above us. It sounded almost like voices, whispering in an ancient tongue. Perhaps it was only the mountain sighing, or perhaps it was the memory of all who had walked this road before us, their songs, their fears, their quiet prayers to the stars. When I finally lay down to sleep, the earth beneath me still hummed faintly. The mountains were not just something we crossed. They were a living presence, vast and patient, carrying our small caravan across their ancient spine. That night, I dreamed of a path made of light, winding endlessly through peaks of silver and cloud. And far ahead, beyond every ridge and shadow, I saw the shimmer of sand, the edge of the desert that awaited us next. Crossing the desert. The mountains fell away behind us, and with them the cool breath of pine and snow. Ahead stretched the vastness of the western desert, a land so wide that the horizon seemed to melt into the sky. The first steps onto the sand were slow, uncertain. The earth beneath our feet no longer felt solid. It shifted and whispered with every movement. The sun rose higher, and soon all that was left was light, fierce, blinding and endless. We adjusted our veils and wrapped our faces in cloth, leaving only the eyes exposed. The camels, burdened yet calm, began their steady rhythm, step, bell, breath, the soft percussion of survival. By midday, the world had become soundless except for that rhythm. The air trembled with heat, and distant dunes wavered like waves of a golden sea. Shadows disappeared. Even the sky seemed drained of colour, pale and infinite. From time to time, we passed the bones of something, a fragment of pottery, a fallen wooden wheel, the remains of an old campfire half buried in sand. Each relic whispered that others had walked this same path, felt the same sun, breathed the same dust. In the stillness of the desert, history did not feel distant. It surrounded us, invisible, yet always present, like heat on the skin. At dusk, when the sun finally began to sink, the desert changed. The light softened, the sand turned amber and rose, and the shadows stretched long and gentle. We made camp in a hollow between dunes. The camels knelt silently, their loads removed. Fires were kindled from dried thorn bushes, their smoke rising in delicate threads. A pot of tea brewed slowly, the scent of herbs mingling with the cool air of evening. As we ate and drank, no one spoke loudly. Words felt heavy in the desert night. The silence between us was not empty, it was full, alive, like the hush between waves. When darkness came, it came all at once. The stars appeared like sparks scattered across an ocean of ink. The Milky Way arched overhead, so bright it cast a faint silver light on the dunes. One of the younger travelers lay back and whispered, "It feels like we're walking through the sky." The old merchant beside him smiled. "We are. The desert is only another form of heaven, one you walk instead of dream." That night, I lay awake long after the fire burned low. The sand beneath my blanket was cool, and the sound of the wind moved like breath, rising, falling, pausing. In that rhythm, I could feel the same pulse that carried the caravan, the same pulse that moved the world. Morning returned with a pale, trembling light. We rose before the sun, wrapping our robes tightly against the chill. In the east, the first blush of dawn painted the dunes in soft violet and gold. As we walked, the wind began to rise, a slow murmur at first, then stronger, until it carried the sand itself. Grains danced around us, stinging our faces. We lowered our heads and pressed on, each step deliberate, each breath precious. By midday, the world was a blur of moving dust. The sun vanished behind a veil of sand, turning the sky a dull copper. The lead guide raised his staff and shouted above the wind, his voice half swallowed by the storm. We gathered close, forming a circle around the camels. Cloaks were drawn tight, heads bowed. The storm roared like a living thing, not angry, but vast, indifferent. Minutes stretched into hours, and then, as suddenly as it had come, the storm began to fade. The air cleared, and the desert reappeared, reshaped, renewed. Our footprints were gone. It was as though we had never been there at all. We rested then, sitting in the shallow shade of a dune. Someone began to hum softly, the same tune that had carried us through the mountains. The old merchant closed his eyes and whispered, "The desert erases everything, but it also listens. It remembers in silence." At sunset, we reached an oasis. At first, it was only a shimmer in the distance, a mirage perhaps. But as we approached, the air grew cooler, and the faint sound of water reached our ears. Palm trees rose like dark brushstrokes against the fading light. We knelt beside the pool, washing our faces, feeling the cold bite of real water. The camels drank deeply, their reflections rippling in the surface. Around us, reeds swayed softly, and birds, real birds, called to one another. For a long while, no one spoke. The sound of the water was enough. It felt sacred, not because of its rarity, but because of its simplicity. In the heart of the endless sand, a few drops of life were enough to make the world whole again. We spent the night at the oasis. Lanterns were hung from low branches. The fire crackled quietly. Someone told a story about a traveller who had once crossed this same desert and found a city made entirely of glass, hidden beneath the dunes. Others smiled, not because they believed it, but because in that story they could hear the echo of every traveler's dream, that beyond the horizon lies something more than emptiness. Later, when the fire dimmed, I walked alone to the edge of the water. The stars reflected there like scattered coins, and for a moment I couldn't tell which way was the sky and which was the earth. I thought of all the roads behind and all the miles yet to come, of the mountains, the wind, the silence. And I realized that travel on the Silk Road was never only about reaching a place. It was about the spaces between, the quiet, the waiting, the endless rhythm of step and breath that tied each soul to the road, to the land, to one another. When I finally lay down to sleep, the wind had gone still. The desert was silent once more. But within that silence, something remained. The heartbeat of the world itself, slow, steady, eternal. Morning departure and the long road. Dawn came softly to the oasis. The first light touched the palms, turning the tips of their fronds to gold. The air was cool, still carrying the faint scent of damp earth and last night's fire. Within the small camp, the travelers began to stir. Slow, gentle motions after a night of stillness. A few camels groaned, stretching their long necks as handlers tightened the ropes and checked the saddles. The rhythm of bells began again, quiet and distant, echoing softly through the waking dunes. They moved with unhurried grace. Blankets were folded, clay cups washed in the clear water of the spring. Someone offered warm tea brewed with desert herbs, its aroma carrying through the crisp morning. A child laughed as a camel sneezed beside him, and the sound, light and brief, felt like a good omen for the journey ahead. When the sun finally rose above the horizon, the oasis shimmered, a mirror of sky and sand, a fleeting dream. The travelers bowed their heads toward it, in silent thanks for shade, water, and one night's peace. Then, one by one, they began to move. The line of camels stretched out once more, the caravan becoming a ribbon of life, winding slowly through the open desert. The morning hours passed with quiet rhythm. Each step felt steady, familiar, as if the land itself guided their pace. The heat grew gradually, the cool wind fading, placed by the slow hum of cicadas and the dry rustle of sand. Ahead, the horizon trembled with mirages, shapes of distant mountains, or perhaps nothing at all. Yet no one hurried. On the Silk Road, time moved differently. It stretched and folded, like the dunes themselves, marked only by the swing of bells and the call of birds overhead. By late afternoon, the sky had softened again. The wind carried the scent of smoke. Faint at first, then stronger. Somewhere ahead, walls of stone waited, a place of rest and firelight. The travelers looked up, weary but calm, their faces glowing with the pale gold of the lowering sun. The day's long journey was ending. And as the shadows grew longer, they saw the outline of a caravanserai rising from the sand, a promise of safety, stories, and the gentle hush of night. Caravanserai nights. The desert night had settled, folding the dunes into long, quiet shadows. The caravanserai appeared on the horizon, a rectangular compound of mud brick walls and wooden gates, its silhouette softened by the last rays of twilight. Inside, the cool air felt like a relief after the sunlit dunes. Travelers guided their camels into the stables, unburdened them, and secured their loads. The soft clatter of saddles and the low murmur of the animals echoed off the walls. Fires were lit in the central courtyard, small flames flickering against the darkening walls. The smell of roasting tea leaves and spices mingled with the dust, creating a warmth that reached both body and spirit. Travelers settled on mats and carpets, stretching weary legs, quietly sharing the evening. Stories began to emerge, one by one. An old merchant told of a city hidden beneath the sands, where glass towers caught the sunlight like liquid gold. A young traveller described the song of the northern mountains, the wind carrying petals and whispers across the snowy peaks. Children, their eyes heavy, listened with rapt attention, imagining dunes stretching into infinity and camels trudging slowly under an endless sun. Outside, the wind sighed through the courtyard, shaking the palm fronds and rattling the wooden shutters. Occasionally, a distant howl of a desert fox broke the silence. Each sound was measured and deliberate, a gentle rhythm to accompany the quiet of the night. Some travelers began to hum, softly, in harmony with the desert. The melody was wordless, but spoke of the road, the long days, the endless sand, the shared burdens, and the fleeting beauty of an oasis at sunset. The notes mingled with the crackle of fire and the whispering wind, weaving a lullaby that carried even the most restless traveler towards sleep. Above, the stars shone with a clarity impossible to find anywhere else. The Milky Way arched over the caravanserai, mirrored faintly in a small pool in the courtyard. Reflections danced with the shadows of people and animals, creating a quiet theatre of light and movement. A lone traveller walked to the edge of the pool, kneeling beside the water. She traced her fingers through the surface, watching ripples scatter like tiny galaxies. She whispered a soft prayer for safe passage, for calm nights, for companions who would remember the journey long after the desert had swallowed their footprints. The fires burned low. Some travelers drifted into sleep on their mats. Others simply rested, eyes half closed, listening to the subtle symphony of night. The shuffle of a camel, the sigh of the wind, the distant call of a bird returning home. The caravanserai itself seemed alive, breathing with the travelers, sharing their quiet vigil. It was a place of pause, not an end, but a continuation of the journey. Here, stories were told, memories were woven, and hearts rested before the road called again. In that stillness, the desert felt close yet infinite. Time lost its sharp edges. Only rhythm remained, the rhythm of fire, water, wind, and footsteps. And as the night deepened, a profound calm settled over the caravanserai, over the dunes, over all that lay beyond the horizon. Eventually, all was silent, except for the faint murmur of life, a breathing, unbroken, eternal. The desert held its secrets, the travelers held their dreams, and the caravan waited patiently for the first light of dawn, when the journey would begin again. Arrival at the city gates. Dawn came quietly once more. A pale blue light spread across the sand as the last embers in the caravanserai's hearth faded to ash. The travellers rose slowly, their movements gentle, careful not to disturb the calm that still lingered from the night. The camels were silent, except for the soft chime of bells as ropes were fastened and packs secured. A faint wind stirred the air, carrying the scent of cool dust and distant grasslands. They left the walls behind, moving eastward beneath a sky washed with silver. The road wound gently over low hills, and before long, the endless dunes began to soften. Traces of green appeared, small shrubs, thin reeds, and then, further on, the shimmer of water gliding through the plain. Birds called overhead. For the first time in many days, the sound of flowing water joined the rhythm of bells. By mid-morning, the travellers could see far ahead, a faint haze that rose like breath from the horizon. Slowly, shapes emerged from the light. Towers, roofs, and walls painted with morning sun. The gates of the city were coming into view. The air changed. It carried the scent of spice and wood smoke, the echo of voices, and the laughter of merchants setting up their stalls. The closer they came, the more the city seemed to awaken. The murmur of life returning after the stillness of the desert. Camels straightened their necks. The handlers smiled faintly, sensing the nearness of rest. When they finally reached the gates, the shadows of the walls fell cool upon them. Guards nodded in greeting. Traders called out to one another, and children darted between the wagons with wide eyes. Inside the walls, colours bloomed. Silk banners fluttering in the morning wind, rows of pottery glinting under sunlight, and the smell of bread baking somewhere unseen. The caravan moved slowly through the streets, past the markets and the narrow alleys where craftsmen worked in quiet focus. Some travellers stopped to rest, others to trade, some only to breathe in the life of the city before journeying onward. The road had brought them here, and yet, as all travellers know, the road never truly ends, for each journey holds another within it, a memory, a dream, a promise, waiting just beyond the horizon. And as the last camel passed through the gate and the bells grew faint, the city folded the sound of the desert into its own heartbeat, until there was no boundary between the road and the rest of the world. Only the quiet rhythm of life continuing under the same vast, unending sky.